Driving my car, not getting very far, with one foot out of the door.
The story behind the story. Good evening. And on behalf of Richard Cerulli, the playwright and producer, and the troupe, we welcome you to the Demitasse Players' next episode of Studio E, entitled The Story Behind the Story. I'm Bob Marone, a member of the Demitasse Players Board of Directors. In this evening's show, I will be conducting an in-depth and frank interview with Cerulli to learn more about the story behind his stories. It is fair to say the body of Cerulli's work falls under the heading of autobiographical fallacy, which is evident in his passionate writing style. Now, we're going to talk with Richard and find out just what it is that motivated him to create this theater troupe, this book publishing enterprise, and so forth. Why does he do it? How did he come about doing it? What are the things in his life and experiences that led to his forming the Demitasse Players? We'll be right back with Richard Cerulli. Good evening, everybody. I'm Bob Marone, and another edition of The Rest of the Story. My guest tonight is Richard Cerulli. Richard is, well, I like to call him the chief cook and bottle washer, but he is the producer and director of a theater group called the Demitasse Players. But the Demitasse Players are something more. They're an organization, they're a passion, and they produce plays, they produce videos, they produce books, and other presentations and other media to bring awareness to mental illness. Richard Cerulli, how are you, sir?
Doing fine, doing fine.
Well, I want to remind people that your organization, and I can't stress this enough, is something that grew out of your life experiences and your family life, really. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it's very fair. It's no secret, you know, people that know me, I shared a story that I grew up in a dysfunctional and toxic household of an extended family. And it did set down a foundation for life.
Okay, I'll hold it right there, because we want people to really get a handle on what the Demitasse Players are. Now, I called you the chief cook and bottle washer because this evolved out of your heart, out of your passion. How long have you been doing this?
The Demitasse Players were formed in 2016 and we did our first play, Via Dolorosa.
Okay, how many years again?
That's actually we're into our sixth year.
Okay, you're in your sixth year. What does Demitasse mean? Where does that come from?
Well, actually, Demitasse itself just means small cup.
Yes.
But the Demitasse name actually comes from a restaurant cafe up in Poughkeepsie called the Demitasse.
Okay, why does that name anchor everything that you do?
Well, I got involved with the arts after my divorce back in 2003, or divorce separation. And I was living up in Dutchess County at the time and got very involved in the arts. And there was a restaurant called the Demitasse, and all us artists would hang out there. And so I have a lot of fond memories. I was divorced. I probably went on a lot of dates there.
Fond memories of the divorce?
Well, of Demitasse. Well, the divorce, I'm actually very happy.
Well, okay, I see that. But then you said there was a lot of dating, so that's interesting.
Well, yeah,
Or
it was.
some.
I was into the arts. I met some very interesting people, and we would go to the Demitasse.
Okay, so that's its origin in terms of why you call it what you call it.
Correct.
What is the objective? I gave a brief overview at the start,
Okay.
but you know what you created. Why this organization? What is it intended to achieve?
The mission of the Demitasse Players is for me to write and produce plays and books that deal awareness or bring awareness for mental illness.
Okay.
And over the years, and very recently, I've lost quite a few people to mental illness, either through suicide or just losing them on an emotional level.
I see. You say more recently. You're talking about the last 10 years, 20 years, 30
Yeah,
years?
probably the last 5 to 10 years.
Okay. Well, that was after you formed the Demitasse Players, though.
Well, actually, one of the motives was a good friend of mine who lived in White Plains, committed suicide. He was suffering from depression and he shot himself.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
So, would it be fair to say the objective is to raise awareness of mental illness?
Exactly.
And through that, to increase understanding, to get more funding for it? What would you say is the ultimate outcome of your work that you'd like to see?
Well, what I'm hoping for is when people view the work, they could look at it, and when they confront mental illness, don't go into denial mode. One of my really pet peeves is I see this happen so often. You have a close friend and you see them slipping into some form of mental illness. Mm-hmm. Now, usually what happens is if you confront that person, they get very upset. They really, usually in denial, you probably lose the friendship. And you just watch the person deteriorate, and it usually comes to a very sad ending. And when you talk to other people and say, would you like to get involved? Would you like to insert yourself? This needs an intervention. People would just say, well, you know, he's just a little down, or she's just a little down, or yeah, she just gets hyper at times. And they really miss the fact that there's a mental illness at play here. And people just dismiss it. And I saw it as a child in my own household. And it's a run, you know, for me, it's a rerun. It just goes over and over again, and you know the ending. And so that really upset me, because I always found out that if my experiences were if somebody was having a very serious illness or actually heading for a breakdown or something, and you would talk to people, they would just dismiss you. And then when this happens and they're hospitalized or something terrible happens, people say, oh, this is so sad. You know, why did this happen? Well, this, you know, the warning signs were there.
The warning signs were there. And again, our apologies, folks. You probably heard a cell phone. We don't know where it came from, but I think we can move along. Well, Richard, here's the issue. I see why you do what you do. You want to increase awareness. You're hoping that these efforts will do that.
Yes.
So let's explain to folks, as I will now, why we're here. The story behind the story, your story. Clearly, you've been motivated, and Richard is open about this, as you will see, motivated by your life experiences.
Correct.
So this interview is going to be, the rest of the interview, most of it, about you. And then we'll get into the different plays and books and stories that you think tell your story and raise awareness the best. Now, where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Westchester, in Port Chester, New York.
Okay, now, I speak easily about this. You grew up in an Italian-American family.
Correct.
What was your childhood like?
It was interesting.
Interesting's a careful word.
Yeah, it's a safe word, but to put it in the context of mental illness, it was a very toxic childhood.
From the get-go?
Day one.
Day one.
Yeah.
Okay, you had a mother and father. Tell us about your parents.
Yeah, it was, my mother was a very smart woman, very smart, very attractive. She could have had a great future for herself. And I realized when I was about 5 years old, now I'm speaking in the current vocabulary. Mm-hmm. I did not have that vocabulary, obviously.
Of course.
But I'm speaking and trying to take the emotion and put it into a current vocabulary. And I noticed when I was young, as 4 or 5 years old, there was something very wrong with her.
Did it create feelings inside you, or was it just an observation at that time?
It was an observation. I don't know how it happened. I just tell people maybe I'm wired that way. I didn't let it upset me. I think what really got me going was the why. Why are they behaving
Okay,
this way?
describe her behavior.
Well, a very typical behavior would be, I'm like, oh, I'm 5 years old,
Right.
and I'm watching TV, Now, I'm 5 years, what do I know at 5 years old? You can't read, and I'm watching a documentary, and I'm watching something on the space race.
Right. Or whatever.
Okay. And I'm really interested, and I said, oh, this looks pretty interesting. And they say something like, in order for this rocket to move, it has to overcome the force of gravity. It's a word I don't know. So I go over to my father, and he's laying on the sofa reading the newspaper, and, Dad, tell me what gravity is. I said, okay.
But what about your mother?
Well, his answer was, could you please tell me what gravity is? So he gives me a very dirty look. He rips one of the pieces of the newspaper, crumples it, and goes like this. There. Okay? Okay.
Newton used the apple.
Yeah, exactly. I said, all right, moving forward, just don't ask my father a question. And fast forward, a couple of weeks later, I'm watching this TV show and another documentary, and they said, a lot of trouble in the world are caused by human beings. Gravity, human beings, they're throwing a lot of stuff at me. So I said, I'm not going to ask my father, I'll ask my mother. So I go see her, and she's sitting in this chair. I realized there was something wrong, and she was in this fetal position, sucking her thumb. And I said, what's a human being? Because they say human beings are a cause of a lot of problems. She looked at me and she says, you're a human being, and that's why you're the problem. Okay.
That's a troubling thing to say. But was anger exhibited? Children react more to behavioral style than they do words, at least at that age.
It was a harsh response.
Yeah, okay, it was done harshly.
Yeah.
Give me some other examples of the way your mother behaved.
Well,
Not so much about what you did, but how she acted.
yeah, she was, as we found out years later, she did suffer from, a number of very serious issues.
A number of issues. But again, describe the behavior that you were subject to.
Constant attack. That was when she was, if you were talking to her, there was a constant attack, insult. And if she wasn't doing that, she was sleeping in the dark, smoking cigarettes in a fetal position. But then if company came over, she would just jump right out, get dressed, and she would be the most outgoing person.
Was she an unhappy person to begin with? We'll get to her diagnosis in a moment.
Very unhappy.
Okay. Did you ever have any insight into that? Was she unhappy in her marriage? Was she unhappy having children? Maybe she didn't want children. Was there any insight that you developed? And again, I'm interested more, how did she treat you? What kinds of things? Was she physical with you? Did she yell and scream? Did she judge?
No, her attacks were very malicious, very focused, and it was done to undermine, and which was very odd because you're asking yourself, myself was, why the need for the attack? I mean, what's the purpose? What's the motive of this? And I remember I was in a couple. Looking back, I shouldn't say they're funny, but you're in kindergarten, and what happens around? I guess it's around Thanksgiving time. And what do teachers do? Make a folder, draw a picture, draw a picture of a turkey, pilgrims, and the whole bit, and draw some pictures. Now, at a very young age, I was very good at art. So I draw this turkey and, pilgrim as best you can, and all these little pictures, and I get these little stars put on them. And teacher says, oh, you know how to draw. Okay, I can draw, but I still don't know what gravity is. So, I take it home and I put it on the table, and my mother sees it and says, wait till your father gets home. Okay. I said, this is going to be good. So,
Well, we'll get to your father in a minute, but go ahead.
now, actually, in this case, my father actually behaved quite well. He comes in, and my mother says, look at this. He looks at it. He says, actually, my father was an artist. He did have a lot of talents. He says, actually, it's very good. He says, actually, sometimes I work with Rich, and Rich could actually draw a straight line without a ruler. And she just, just like how stupid he is. Don't you think he's about as intelligent as a moron?
And this kind of behavior went on. Now,
Yeah.
did you have brothers and sisters?
Yes.
How
I'm
many?
the oldest.
Okay. What other children were in the household?
Well, at that time, it would have been just me and my next youngest brother. The other children were born about 11 years after
How
me.
many?
2 more. So it's 4 total.
Okay, a brother and
2 brothers and a sister.
2 brothers and a sister.
Yeah.
Okay, in addition to you.
Yeah.
Okay. Did they experience these same kinds of things?
No.
You must ask yourself why, which then brings the if you will, the camera right on you, as it physically is now, and I should think symbolically, you were a target.
Quite a bit.
Before you go further, what was your mother diagnosed with?
Well, she
ultimately?
was never diagnosed because the family, unfortunately, used her illness for their own benefit.
Okay, we'll get to that. Guess, you said she had several illnesses in your view. What do you believe she suffered from?
Munchausen's by proxy, where what I found out years later, I mean, much later in life.
So where people enjoy being the victim.
Yeah, what usually, now I'm not a psychologist, so I want to be very careful, but what I've read and studied
Yeah,
on
you're
it is,
entitled to your opinion here. What else besides Munchausen? We'll get into each one.
severe depression,
Okay,
mood swings,
comes with the territory.
a very chronic liar, storyteller,
Well, perhaps even a personality disorder we can mix in with all of that.
most likely.
Any
yes.
chance that she was a borderline personality?
Oh, definitely.
Because she exhibits a lot of that, histrionic personality, narcissistic. There's a lot to work with here. But she only focused on you. Are you comfortable saying that only you were treated this way?
Well, it's reality, so, and it is what it is.
Okay, tell us about your brothers and sisters.
They didn't get the brunt of it.
Okay, take the next oldest. Who would that be?
Oh, that'd be my brother Chris, who's actually a surgeon.
Okay. And we've talked a little bit off air. You didn't talk with him for 20 years. That's not normal.
Well, we never argued. We never had differences. He, after high school, he went to college, and he stood away from the family. He did
Why?
not get the brunt of it, but he felt what was going on around. So in his own admission, said it was best for him to run. He just,
Okay.
Yeah.
So he was like someone living in an apartment near a war zone,
yeah.
in effect. Tell us about your sisters.
My youngest sister, she was born 11, there's 11-year difference, and right now she's a teacher.
Does she live nearby here in
She's in
Westchester?
Dutchess County.
Do you talk with her?
Yeah, quite a bit.
Okay.
We've had also a reunion about 3 years ago.
A reunion. Was there a gap?
Yeah, quite a bit.
Why?
What was really happening is while the elders of the family were still alive, they were still manipulating and dividing up.
But what was her reason for not communicating with you, or was it your choice?
It was my choice.
Why?
There was, I'd be very careful because she's probably going to watch the show. I just felt that it was just going to be a lot of uncomfortable dialogue, and it was just going to be problems. And my take was, I don't hold a grievance, and it's not a matter of love or hate. It's a sister, but I just realized getting close may just cause more tensions.
Does this have anything to do with the fact that she wasn't treated as you were treated, or did she, like anyone else, kind of like sort of like Stockholm syndrome, did she more or less stay safe under the cover of your parents?
No, I think she saw what was going on, and I think it's impacted her much harder than certainly me.
Harder than you?
Well, I mean, the how she behaved to it and how she reacted to it.
Okay, but she wasn't subject to as much abuse as you were.
No.
Okay, now let's take the next, the younger sibling. What about her?
I would say he has to find himself, and I'll just let it go at that.
Oh, but he's the youngest.
Yes.
Okay, you let it go at that. Have you had a relationship with him?
Not a very good one. Very angry person.
He's very angry.
Very angry.
Is it possible that he too was mistreated and that's why he behaves as he does?
When you look at mistreatment, it's hard to explain. He wasn't mistreated, he was abandoned because he was born years later. So by that time, my parents are divorced. And they're still arguing with each other.
Okay, we'll get to that.
And so nobody wants them. So so my father says, I had enough of the kids, I'm not going to do it.
Okay.
So my mother would take them for a while, then she would give them to my grandparents, and he'd give them to somebody else. And I think at a very young age, realized he wasn't wanted. Now, he wasn't poorly treated when people would be with him or be attending to him. They realized that he was alone, he was the youngest, and they would buy him gifts as a way of saying, we really love you. So, and of course, that really does not correct the problem.
Folks, we're talking with Richard Cerulli. He's the producer, director, in fact, we call him the CEO, the chief cook and bottle washer of the Demitasse Players. They're a theater group, but they're also a media publishing entity, videos, books, etc., about mental illness with the intention of spreading awareness of mental illness and how it develops, how it evolves, and how we deal with it or don't deal with it in modern society. I'm Bob Marone with Richard, and as you can see, this is the story behind the story. We'll say more about the Demitasse Players in a little while, but what we're trying to understand today, and Richard is sharing with us very bravely, I think, how he came to the conclusions he's come to and why he created the Demitasse Players in the first place. Richard, let's talk about your father. We know the way your mother was, and the last comment about your mom for now is, was she ever physical with you?
No, she wasn't.
Okay, so it was all verbal abuse and judgmental abuse?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, most of it targeted to you believe?
Exactly.
Tell us about your father.
Father was, I'm really not quite sure what category to put him in. He was very distant, very selfish. He would never help you in any way if it involved money at any level. And as I got older and I had my own business, he tried swindling money from me.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go first to your childhood. And first, describe your father. Was he an immigrant? Was he working class? What could you say about him?
Well, my father was born in Italy. He came at a very young age, probably around 6 or 7. And he picked up the English language very well. I could honestly say he never spoke with an accent. And he had an excellent command of the English language. He spoke very well, very articulate. He became a contractor. He was a very good carpenter, woodworker. I mean, a top craftsman, very European, European school type of thing. But he was the type of father who just really didn't want to get involved,
That wasn't uncommon, is it fair to say, for certain immigrants or Italian-American parents, particularly Italian-American men of that era?
I would probably say maybe someone like that, and giving him the benefit of the doubt, that coming to America at such a young age, he didn't understand America. He didn't understand the American values. So he was still living in a very old culture.
Now, you mentioned abjectly selfish, and I'm using that term. And the reason I say that, folks, is I have read a script where I was to play, again, because of COVID, I haven't done it yet, but where I was to play a man who very clearly is your father. And so in developing my character for that, I got to know him a little bit.
Yeah.
This was a guy who was selfish, doubtful, questioned your motives, and didn't think much of where you were taking your life. Is that a fair statement?
Very, very fair statement. And, there was one incident that, these are things you could forgive, but you can't forget.
Was he always this mean-spirited?
He had bouts of happiness, so I would probably say he may have suffered from a bipolar condition as well. I mean, he could swing, but his overall personality was, like I would say to him, why don't you help your son? And he says, I don't owe you anything. I brought you into this world.
Yeah, that's in the script.
And he says, I brought you into this world, and you should, I don't owe you anything after birth. And I would say to him, it sounds very reptilian. You just lay eggs and slither away. And he'd say,
That's greatly put.
and he would say, better be a snake than a parasite to ask me for help.
Well, did he feel that it was your mother's job to do that?
He felt that he had really no responsibility.
Well, he worked, put food on the table, did he?
He did, but there was just underlying anger with him.
Okay.
You could see he wasn't happy with himself.
How did you get along with your mother, and how did they meet?
Not very well.
They didn't get along well at all. It doesn't sound like they would.
Yeah, I mean, it was to show you how toxic it could be. I remember at a very young age, once again, I'm 6 years old, watching TV. I remember it very well. I'm watching Walt Disney, The Magic Kingdom. Oh, what a nice world this is, And I hear some yelling and screaming going on in the kitchen. 1957, 1958. And one of my mother's illnesses is she couldn't handle money. So if you gave her money to pay bills, she just squandered, never paid the bills. And, we get things like shutting the lights off or things like that. And, we didn't know it at the time. And two stories, I think, I don't want to go off target, but to show you what a personality she had and what a great, convincing liar she was. I come home from school for lunch, because I used to walk, and I get into the house and I put the light switch on and no lights. And I go into the kitchen and no lights are going on. And, what do I know? I'm 5 years old. I know there's a utility company. So my mother gets in about 5 minutes later, and I just say, the electricity's, we have no electricity. She gives me a dirty look, just pushes me aside, calls up the utility company. At that time, you could call somebody locally. And she says, just want to let you know, you shut this power off. And I have a son that has a very serious disease, and he's on life support systems. And if you don't put this power on, I'm going to sue you, because under Article 6, and 5 minutes later,
Well, you know what, though, in terms of getting the electricity put on, she wouldn't be the first person who told a story to a bill collector. I mean...
Yeah, but once again, it's so convincing.
I have to call your attention to something. Several times during our conversation so far, we've gotten to your father, and we have a pretty good beginning there, and your sibling. It bounces back to your mom a lot.
Yes.
And you bring her up first in terms of why you are who you are, what you are today. She's in there with you in some way.
Well, when you look at it very objectively, and when I'm going to be very careful, I don't like the word emotions to a certain degree.
Well, but they're real. And that's the one thing we can control our behavior, as you well know, but not your emotions. She stirs something in you. Even sadness comes across your face.
I'm going to be very careful with words, because people will take those words and then project into me what they think I'm thinking.
Well, what they think you're feeling, but that's why we're doing this. You get a chance to clarify.
Yeah.
Do you have more anger or angst towards her than your father?
I don't have angst towards any one of them.
Really?
None whatsoever.
But yet they've left this impression with you.
Well, what I really saw at a young age, especially with my mother, is that this is a very sick person, out of control.
Okay.
And you don't look at the person, you look at the illness.
No, true, but a 5 or a 6-year-old by nature isn't analytical. I mean, you had some analytical gifts, clearly, and you're articulating them. But you had to have feelings. You had to stay with you this, and to generate this wonderful work that you're doing, which I need to underscore. You had to have been hurt by this, Richard.
I have to be honest. To show you how it impacted me in terms of writing, I saw a person I felt very sorry for. And I could not let it impact or sway it in any way.
Okay, I have to go here. How much of it, now, it's no secret I had serious issues with depression many years ago. And a lot of my depression had evolved from covering up my feelings. As this doctor that saved my life used to say, that's my mom. I can't be angry at her. I love my mom. Ergo, I put another piece of bread over the meat of that sandwich and move on. Is there any of that going on, do you think?
No.
You really have no anger towards her?
No anger at
Never
all.
did?
What's that?
Never did, even as a child?
It was never anger. It was always disappointment and why. And that's always been very central at a very young age.
Was she more the culprit in the relationship with your dad?
Pretty much, yes.
Okay, because that came out. Well, let's go back to him, because after getting character ready for that script, I got to know him a little bit. And
Tough character.
he was not a nice person.
Not really. I mean, to use a very good example, and I was like 21. I was working full-time in the construction industry because it paid well as a union cement mason and cement finisher. So I could support my wife, at that time one daughter, and I could go to college full-time at night.
We'll get to that chronologically later.
And I remember, look, you're young, you're starting out, you got a lot of financial responsibilities.
Yes, sir.
And so I'm doing my best. So it just happens on one winter I lose, because of the weather, I can't work for a couple of weeks. So now it's ouch. So against my better judgment, I want to go see to my father and see if he could help in some way. Now, I pretty much knew what the answer was going to be, but I thought I'd give it one more shot. So I go visit him, and he's at his mother's house, of which his brother, my uncle, lives with her, okay? Now, you have to really look at this, and this is why I write this work, is because it just shows how blind people are to their own indiscretions. Mm-hmm. And you're going to appreciate this as an Italian-American. I walk in, and here's my father. He's about 50 years old. And he's sitting at the table, and he's telling his mother, come on, give me the food. And she's just ladling this food, and he's ladling in the whole bit.
Like Richie Aprile in The Sopranos.
Yeah, exactly. And, they're eating quite well, and they're not saying, would you like something? Would you like to join us? And they said, why are you here? I said, well, I do visit every week. And they says, don't pat yourself on the back. You're always bragging about yourself. I says, no, even with all this, I went and visited every one of them once a week, out of respect. And I said, well, my siblings don't come and visit. You're always thinking of yourself, aren't you? You're so... Wow. And I said, well, let's get to the point. I said, my daughter needs food. I says, and I hit the wall. I said, I just need $50 to buy baby food and things like that. So my uncle looks and he says, why don't you just go on welfare?
This is your uncle.
Yeah.
He's also at the table.
And I said, well, I can't. He says, why? I said, well, if I go on welfare, I just don't think I belong to be on welfare, but more importantly, I have a life insurance policy that if something happens to me, they could bury me and my family's taken care of. And he looks at me and he said, you're so selfish.
Richard, let's flip this now on you.
Yeah.
He's judgmental. He diminishes you. He has you question your own motives. Now, anyone who's ever been depressed or dealt with self-esteem issues knows that you have this tendency to say, see, I did something. It's like, remember the great movie, What About Bob, when they tie him to the masthead and he says, look at me, I sail. I actually sail.
Yes.
Because no one, his entire life, he's always been told he's no good, he can't do anything.
Yeah.
How did that make you feel?
It only made me dig in and say, look, buddy, you could do what you want. You are not going to stop me.
No, you felt that way. Well, that gave you that onus.
Oh, that just gave me drive.
That anger and drive.
Yeah.
But once again, anger is the flip side of hurt. It had to hurt.
No, I realized I was dealing with some very sick people.
Yes.
And I was not, in all fairness, I was not going to allow them to hurt me.
Okay, now, they got divorced. Why did they get divorced?
They were just not compatible.
Summary, but how long after, now they had 4 children, they had 3 more after you.
Yeah.
So, and one is how, the youngest is how many years younger than you?
About 14.
So they stayed married another 14 years after they kicked the shit out of you. Excuse my language, folks. They stayed married, how long after the last child did they get divorced?
Probably about, let's see, God, about 6, 7 years.
Okay, we're now moving, we jumped a little bit ahead when you needed money after you had children. Yeah. Let's go back to Richard Cerulli. So Richard has this childhood. You were singled out by both parents, it seems, ridiculed. Why do you think they singled you out?
Well, with my mother, I thought it was pretty obvious. She in hindsight, there was the Munchausen's disorder. Mm-hmm. And the way that works, which I found out years later, is they'll harass one child and treat the other ones nice. Mm-hmm. So if I were to go to social services or to relatives and say, look what my mother's doing, they would say, oh, but she's such an outgoing person. She's so nice. Rich, you're right. You're a liar. Let me ask the other kids.
It's interesting. Do you know why I selected personality disorder for her, among the other things? As you know, it's not education if you can put a gun to someone's head and say, can you behave well? If they can behave well, at least they're not totally psychotic. Yeah. They know right from wrong. So when people showed up at your house, your mom could behave well. Yeah. There's also, beyond mental illness there, a character trait that's, am I onto something here? That's not very appetizing.
Yeah, I had it's interesting you bring that up. A couple of years ago, I get an email from my cousin. She was a contemporary of my mother's. She's like, at the time, she just passed away about a month ago. And we about 2 years ago, reconnect. And so nice talking to her. And my last conversation with her, she was like, Rich, she says, your mother was such an outgoing, positive person. And, can I
you just have to swallow that. In the interest of time, I want to jump ahead to your grammar school and then into high school. I know you've written a piece recently, or I believe it was one of your new videos, dealing with the time you were bullied. What were your teenage years like in a house like that? And how did your parents treat you? How did it affect you in school? And how were you perceived in school?
Yeah, in school, I can honestly say I was just the typical average kid. Nothing special. When
hobbies at the time, hobbies, sports, reading?
Played guitar, art, things like that. And parents, very, very distant, really not getting involved. It was, they were just as they were, so they would just do very weird things,
Such as?
Well, I remember I was in 8th grade. Around 8th grade, the hormones kick in, and you start noticing women.
Yeah.
Okay, so the short of it is I wind up dating this blonde, blue-eyed girl from a Catholic school, Holy Child. And
the way your face looked sad before, now it has a great big smile on it.
Well, a few songs are written about her, so.
Oh, okay. Well, this is something that I want people to see about you. When you're moved, you write, you create, and that's something I think that we have to tie together here in a little while. Yeah. But did you have a happy adolescence?
I would say it wasn't melancholy.
Okay, but yet you still have all this from your youth percolating that manifested itself later on with the Demitasse players.
Yes.
So we need to get to that eventually, and we will. So you go through high school, college. You've got 1 million degrees, which you can share with people later. Two PhDs, folks, 3 or 4 master's degrees, and God knows what else, and a corporate career. But again, things we'll get to. Now, you meet someone and you get married. We know that your marriage didn't last. Why not?
Well, this becomes one of the other influences is why Demitasse becomes so important. Because I grow up in this very dysfunctional, toxic fun where you know your parents have mental disorders. So you marry your high school sweetheart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're young. You know, you're dating at 17, 18 years old, and you know, you're not looking at her like, yeah, does she have bipolar? You think she has Munchausen's disease?
Is that because of your mom? You're thinking of that about your future mate?
No, I'm not even thinking about it at all. I'm looking at she's got some beautiful blue eyes, and she's.
Do you know, if Oprah were here, you'd say you married your mother.
She was very different.
No, but that's what Oprah would say right now. You think she has Munchausen's, which you thought your mother had,
Yeah.
bipolar, which your mother had, personality disorder. Yeah. She fits the bill, Richard.
Well, when I met her, of course, you're 18 years old, and you don't know these things.
No, you know what you see as well.
Yeah, I mean, we'll just say I was motivated for good geography.
Yeah, good geography, and also I'm sure she was fetching in certain other ways. But now what I'm learning is your wife had a certain behavior that didn't work for you, a style of behavior, characteristics, etc.
Yeah, you know, and this is why I'm so passionate about it, because I can honestly say for the first part of the marriage, it was very good.
How long were you married?
I was married for 30 years.
You were married for 30 years, so it wasn't like one and done.
No.
So quickly. What culminated in its end, if I may ask that? And again, with all deference to your wife, we're only telling one side of the story, of course. But
Yeah, no, I'm going to be objective. She was institutionalized for having a number of nervous breakdowns, bipolar, and
Okay.
maybe.
I'm sorry.
So, and that's when this happened. This all happened late '90s, early around 2002, and that's when I started thinking, this mental illness is much bigger and widespread than we acknowledge.
Is it fair to say then that you have this relationship with your wife? You're married 30 years. She suffers from mental illness, that you start making connections. Was it a continuum of having dealt with people with issues, or did you connect it right back to your childhood?
No, it was one after another. And, let's face it, you go through life, you meet people, and you just can't meet people and say, I think you're part of that high percentage. Over the years, I'd say over the last 20 years, I became very astute in picking it up in people.
Okay, now you had a child. How old is she today?
2 daughters.
2 daughters. How
Yes.
old are they?
48 and 43.
Okay. Do you have grandchildren yet?
No, we don't.
Greatest thing you'll ever do, but that for another day. Do you have a relationship with them?
No.
Why not?
Mental illness.
Both? What types of illnesses do they have?
It's all I could say is it's for legal reasons. It's probably best I don't.
Okay, that
go
you
into.
don't.
But yeah, it was, and that was really because all these things started surfacing around 2010, and it was all culminating with the ex, the kids, and
Do they have a relationship with your ex-wife?
very close.
They are close.
Yes.
Do you have a relationship with your ex-wife at all?
None whatsoever.
Okay, or the daughters. What would they say if they were here now? Well, what would your ex-wife say? That's fair. I'll leave the children out.
I'm actually not sure.
Okay.
I don't know.
All right, so here we have, and we're to a really important waypoint in this flight we're taking. You're divorced, you're going to the Demitasse, you're meeting women, you're getting in touch with this whole artistic side of yourself.
Yeah.
And you form the Demitasse Players. Now, in a lot of the stuff I've read about you, about the creative things that you've done, the word existential comes up again and again. It's the only word that comes up more than Demitasse. When you use that word in your writing, what do you mean?
Well, existentialism is a form of philosophy, but it's also a form of psychology. And when I first got involved in existentialism, actually the day on that train, a little epiphany I had when I did this.
Now you can
I
go back
read
to that.
a book by Søren Kierkegaard, and I was very moved by it. And existentialism is it's not an elite club. I mean, you could be a believer.
No, I understand.
And
Although it is interesting that Kierkegaard was famous for seeing that tragedy and happiness and success, they were all linked in some way.
yeah, you see what people give existentialism a very bad rap because they don't understand what it's really about.
Well, from a therapeutic point of view, it can be life-saving.
I couldn't agree more, and that's why, as part of the Demitasse, I bring that in because if you embrace an existential view, you could navigate this. And I'm not going to say I was a victim; I was the target, and that really helped me.
That's words. It was what it was.
Yeah, but existentialism, what it does is, it fills the void where religion and philosophy end, because religion tells us how to be good. Philosophy tells us how to be good.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Not always.
Not always. But it never tells us what do we have to do when we deal with those ugly things in life.
You're right, but I just want to throw this into this little soup that you're brewing. The key thing, and the word is so arcane and esoteric, it makes people reject it.
Yes.
So I'm not going to, this is the last time I'll use the word existential.
Yeah.
The whole point is nothing's certain.
Nothing.
And the less sure you are of things, the healthier you can be if you stop grasping at every piece of driftwood, whether it be religion or a Donald Trump or whomever it might be that you think is in charge or has the right answer. There are no perfectly right answers.
Exactly.
And if you look at it and take that word existentialism away, it leads to, including your parents, by the way, that life's harder from an intellectual standpoint at times, but easier to grasp.
Yeah.
It's like there's a great quote I want to share with you that I read recently. And it was by Freud, of all people. And it was a piece in Harper's Magazine about suicide. And he said, I find it interesting that some people have to be near suicide before they realize that life doesn't have intrinsic meaning.
Very good.
And it's a
Very
great line. But I'm just throwing that out there to give some detail to the word existential that you use so often. Continue. So now here you are. You bring up existentialism. You're in that coffee shop. What springs out of you that gave rise to a troupe, a theater troupe of 20 people, an executive board of which I'm a member, books, tapes, videos, this interview? How did it culminate?
I just was, it was very odd. I was in my office at work, and I said, I'm going to write a play. And I'm going to write a play about my family. And I think this story has to be told. Now, Via Dolorosa was our first play. We got really good reviews. But I actually pulled Via Dolorosa from a book which I haven't completed, which was Shanty Talk.
Yes.
That takes the family. And I realized the book would be too cumbersome for a play. So I took what I considered the high points out, and I focused it around what it was like me growing up in this highly toxic environment. And I said, people have to see this. Because, I remember when I sent the script out, I was in the city, and there were two people I thought, hopefully they were going to be investors. And I'm meeting with them. One's a very attractive blonde woman. I mean, Nordic, the whole bit.
How come I haven't met her yet? No, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And the other one's, he owns a business. We're very good friends. And And so we meet for lunch, and we were talking, and I give him the script, and she says something. The woman says, "Boy," she says, "you must have had the ideal childhood.
What?
Just look at this. You have these college degrees. You got this great corporate job. People like you. You're laughing, smiling. You're a sharp business exec. I mean, people are calling you. They like your company. Boy, you must have had the ideal childhood." And I said, "Well, read the play, and I'll see you next week."
Yeah.
And I met with her a week later with this other fellow. And this was very moving for me. She says, "Rich, I read this play. My God, I wish I would have read this 20 years ago, because this is what my mother did to me. And I was convinced I was useless, bad, and everything else. And I spent 20 years in therapy actually believing I was a failure." And she says, "You got to show this play." And she says, "It didn't impact you." I said, "Apparently not." And she said, "Once again, why?" And I just said, "I'm sorry. I just won't let people own me." There is I forget the philosopher, I think it's Epicletus, and he made a statement. He says, "We would not hand over our bodies to anyone to give it up, but we gladly give over our minds to people." And that left an impression on me, and I just said, I won't surrender that. Even as a child, I did not read that philosophy, but at a very young, I'd say as young as 5 or 6 years old, I said, they're not going to own me.
If you had to look deep inside yourself, what's your principal motivation for the Demitasse players and this organization?
Well, I hope it continues to grow. I mean, it grew very rapidly, but I think it has a bigger role to play. I would like people to learn from it. I want people to say, "I've read your work, I saw your plays. It has helped me. It made me look at life differently. It made me look at myself differently. I have more of a," I'm not even existential, but I could understand and how I frame and interpret life. I use the word micro moments. And I said, all these events.
All life is a micro moment.
Yeah, you have all these little things going. And I just said, it's how we frame it and interpret it.
Okay. I know we've only got a few minutes. We got 3 minutes, maybe a little more.
I think we should keep going.
Do you feel, when we talk about mental illness, that you yourself have been impacted by it, where you've developed either depression or any of the symptoms yourself?
I can honestly say no, and I'm not saying that certainly out of denial. I have friends who are psychologists and social workers, and what I will do is, if I have to make a life decision, I will go to them and say, for argument's sake, I'm in this situation. This is how I'm responding to it. I believe it's rational, logical. I'm not hurting anyone. I want your view of it. So they would certainly give me a clean bill of health, not to say I don't have a few flaws.
Well, what's a clean bill of health? I mean, for example, have you ever been depressed over the life you led? You had to be depressed sometimes as a child. I mean, just the way you wrote it, who wouldn't be depressed if their father said, "I'm not going to give you $50, you parasite. You think you're a big shot to come over here," et cetera, or the kinds of things that they said to you when you were a child, or the bully that you had to punch, or any of these other things. You were never depressed by that? You never felt less than?
No.
Okay.
Never.
So then what percolated? Is it this analytical gift you have to see it? For example, we've talked about, in relation to the manuscript I once showed you, you had insight into some of the behaviors that only someone who suffered really deep depression can have. Where did that come from? From observation?
I would just watch people as an innocent bystander. I would just watch this behavior. I mean, let me go back. This is where the passion comes from. As I told you, my mother had this problem with money. And when I was, once again, 5 years old, I hear this big argument going on in the kitchen. I walk into the kitchen, and my mother's on her hands and knees crying. And my father's there, and her parents are there. and they're yelling and screaming at her, kicking her. Okay? You stole her money. Where's the money? What are you doing? Are you crazy? You're a crazy woman. Brutal. Now, you're 5 years old. I walk in, I see this. You see your mother crying like a baby. And then they tell her, go into the garbage and pick everything out of that garbage and make sure you didn't throw that money out.
Oh, my goodness.
Now, at that time, you didn't have recyclables. And my mother obeys. She was a brilliant. And she puts her hands in the garbage, and her hands are getting all cut to pieces. And she looks at my grandparents, which are her parents, and my father, and says, you don't understand. I'm sick. I need help. Help me, please. Now, this is your mother. She's on her hand. You're watching her cry like a child. And they're kicking her and slapping her around.
Okay. I'm going to go back to this again.
Yeah.
And I'm going to play shrink for a minute.
Okay.
Now, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I've been grist for the mill of a couple of very good ones.
Okay.
They saved my life. Now, when I was in the chair, in their chairs, they would say to me after a conversation like this, whether you're conscious of it or not, it would seem to me, Bob, or I'm saying to you, Richard, that yes, this had an effect on you. Yes, it's motivated all this, but you experienced trauma, but kind of deny it was trauma.
I didn't see, I'll be very honest. I remember that day clearly.
And I'm not trying to diagnose you.
No.
I'm simply saying that is there any part of you that uses this analytical ability to rationalize it? I mean, it's made for great art and it's going to help people, but I can't help but wonder that. And I'm sure the same is true of our
Well, you
viewers
see,
today.
the trap that I'm going to put myself in, quite honestly, is when I saw that, I didn't say, oh, I want to cry. Oh, how is this doing? I looked at it. I could honestly say there was no emotion in me.
None.
None. I just looked at this and I just said, how terrible is this human condition?
Okay. Hold it right there, because
Yeah.
this has been about you.
Yeah.
And folks, this is not the last of what will be a series of interviews, because we do want to get into the depth of some of his plays, some of his books, etc. I want you to think for a moment of your best friend. And if you're dating anyone, that person. If I could combine them into one brain and put them in another chair over here, how would they describe you, do you think?
I have to be careful with this because if I speak candidly,
Yes.
people will say it's arrogant.
There's no harm in that. Arrogance is a function of confidence. How
would
else
say
would they
com-
describe you?
I would just say, I have to be careful. I was very influenced by things of Holy Writ, good and bad, golden rule, whatever it is, philosophy, doing the right thing. Now, of course, I'm not perfect. There are days, of course, when my temper gets, we all have it, and so I'm far from perfect. But people, my good friends who know me and have known me a long time, will say, Rich is a very honorable, trustworthy guy.
Mm-hmm.
He's forthright, and he always tells you what's going on. You don't have to guess with Rich in your friendship. Even, my male friends who I've known a long time, they would say, Rich puts the cards on the table. You never have to guess. I would say for most of my good relationships, and I would be careful of that, they would say, Rich is very forthright. I mean, when you talk to Rich, he just puts his cards down on the table. He does. You don't have to do too much guesswork, what I'm saying.
What do you think they would think you could be better at?
We could always be better. Maybe, I don't know. I just don't know. I mean, I know I could be better at so many things,
Behaviorally, as a friend or as a personality?
Well, I work on that.
What do you think they don't like about you? You work on it. What is it you work on?
Well, I think what happens with people, and I'm going to be very careful with this, it's, I talk to Rich, he's writing a book, he's writing a play, he's writing music, he's doing this, and why can't he just be a normal guy and just go to the bar?
Okay.
And
Okay, one last question. And again, in the future, folks, we will be talking about many other aspects of Richard's background, but we'll be getting into the work that he does. Do you have any regrets?
You know, I can honestly say no.
Okay.
You know, life has taken me where it has to be. You know, when I talk to people, and I had this conversation recently with a good friend who's a psychologist, and they said, Rich, do you think this has impacted your life? She said, you have a lot of ink on the resume. You have quite a nice life project. They says, do you ever think of what if? And I said, well, I don't like to go there because it's make-believe. I says, but I do have to say this. I said, it's been a very beautiful experience overall. Because if I look at this and I look at all that toxicity and everything else, I was taught lessons. And I thought that I could be empathetic, and they were examples not to follow. And I said, so if that never happened, I never would have wrote Via Dolorosa, and I never would have met the great people in life. I said, so just look at me today. I said, you know, I had a little bit of a life event about 3.5 years ago. And
well, we want to hold back on that because we have to wrap it up soon.
Yeah.
And I want your final thoughts about Richard.
yeah, I would say I have no regrets because where I am today, I'm very happy. I have found my essence in life. I've taken my existence to essence. I lived the life that I wanted. I went to college, got all the degrees I wanted. I wrote books, I wrote plays.
You have plenty more to do, and we will cover that in a future episode. Folks, this is Richard Cerulli. He is the producer, the director of the Demitasse Players. They're interested in providing knowledge and insight into mental illness. We'll have a lot more to follow and a lot more to cover in future episodes. I'm Bob Marone for the Demitasse Players. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed our evening's presentation and found it to be entertaining, informative, and enlightening. Please review our website to view our extensive body of work. We would also like to extend our thanks to the White Plains Community Media and its staff, James Kenny, Rita Santos, and Keith Baker, for all their support in making this evening's show possible. Good evening, and thank you.